Well, hello and happy Friday, everyone. It's amazing how these Friday videos always fall on Fridays. I'm just can't figure out how I do that, but must just be a hidden talent I have. So anyway, here we are, another Friday, and it's time to do our trifecta of shoutouts, story, and groaner. So let's get to it. Our shoutouts for this week, the first one is Cup Ojo, and he does videos on nature and mostly on insects, and I find them very fascinating. I actually asked him once if he was, what's the name? Can't think of the fancy name for the people who study insects, and entomologist. And he said no, but I think he is. He may not have a degree in entomology, but I think he's an entomologist at heart. But check out Cup of Joe. It's very educational, very fascinating, and it's amazing when you see insects close up, how many of them are actually just amazing. Just actually quite pretty color-wise and otherwise. So anyway, check out Cup of Joe. The next channel I'm shouting out is a metal detecting channel called Digging Into Yesterday. And that's really what he does. He does metal detecting and finds relics and different things that are part of history, and it's always nice to get those things out of the ground and preserve them if you can, because some of them may not be important in the fact that they were something famous, like the gun that John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln with, but they're still fascinating bits of our history, and they can tell us a lot about the area and where they're found as to what happened in that area. And that. So just ask an archaeologist or an anthropologist, and one of their favorite things to find is a garbage dump from, if you find the ruins of a medieval town, the garbage dump will tell you a lot about how people lived their lives. So when you find things people have thrown away, or find things people have lost or dropped, it tells you a lot about the people that lived in that area. And if you can find a date for that item, it kind of lets you know, were they well off, were they barely scraping by. You can learn a lot. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here and on my soapbox. So check into Digging Into Yesterday. And the last channel I'm shouting out is a fairly new channel. Last time I looked, I think she had 5 or 6 subscribers, but a really enjoyable channel. And it's Desert Rose Exploration. A young lady near Reno, Nevada, who does exploring of the history and the wilderness and that of Nevada. So be sure to check her out and give her some support. You'll really enjoy her hikes and her commentaries, and the scenery that she shows is wonderful. So Desert Rose Exploration, Digging Into Yesterday, and Cup Ojo. Alrighty. And as usual, I'll put those names up here in a speech bubble. All right, let's get on with our next thing, which is Chapter 9 of Frank and Abby's mystery, The Answers Man. So if you remember the end of Chapter 8, Frank left Abby with Mrs. Wainwright, and he was heading off to the Derringer goat farm to see if he could learn anything more about the disappearance of Pastor Wainwright. It took a little longer than I thought to find the lane leading up to the farm, but it had to be the right place, as the beat-up mailbox by the road had the name Derringer on its side in faded red paint. I drove up the lane and into the farmyard. I could see the spot by the barn where Jared had sunk the van into the mud, so I stayed on the side of the yard closer to the house to avoid the same fate. I parked the car and looked around to see if it was safe to get out. Sure enough, within seconds of my stopping, a dog was by the side of the car, barking at me. His tail was wagging, but I still wasn't about to risk being bitten. I was still looking at the dog when I heard someone yell, "Farley, stop that and come here." I looked toward the house and saw a large, raw-boned woman standing on the front porch. Farley had stopped barking and had run over to the woman and now stood by her side. It's safe to get out of the It's safe to get out of the car. Farley is all bark and no bite. I slowly got out of the car and headed towards the house. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs leading to the porch. "Hi, my name is Frank Harvey. Are you Debbie Derringer?" I inquired of the Amazon standing before me. "Yeah, that's me," she answered. "What do you want?" "I'm looking into the disappearance of Pastor Dennis Wainwright, and your name has come up several times, and I was wondering if you would be willing to answer a few questions for me." "Well, what the blankety blank would I know about some pastor? I don't even believe in all that religious mumble jumble. So what are you, a cop?" "No, I'm making inquiries on behalf of the church and his family. Jared Prentice said he brought a load of plywood out here and had gotten the van he was driving stuck in the mud. Can you confirm his story?" "Yeah, the idiot did exactly that. You can still see where the van sank in over there by the barn. I had to use my tractor to pull it out." "Well, no use standing out here gabbing. You might as well come in and we can at least be comfortable." With that, she turned and entered the house, stopping inside to hold the door open for me. Then she led me down a hallway to the kitchen and indicated that I might take a seat at the kitchen table. "Would you like a coffee?" "Oh, that would be nice. Yes, please." Debbie got a mug down out of the cupboard and filled it. She then set it on the table in front of me and pointed to the sugar bowl at the center of the table and asked if I would like milk. Once again, I responded, "Yes, please." She moved behind me to go to the refrigerator. Then she must have struck me over the head or something. The last thing I remember was sliding from the chair and hitting the floor, and the lights went out. When I came to, my head was pounding, my vision was blurred, and I felt nauseated. I tried to sit up and regretted it instantly. "You'd best just lie there for a while," a male voice suggested. I took his advice and lay my head back down. I passed out again. The next time I came to, I felt someone wiping my face with a cool, wet cloth. My head ached like nothing I'd ever felt before, and my eyes still refused to focus. So much for movies and TV, where the hero takes one over the head and then wakes up to immediately jump to his feet and chase after the bad guys. "You had best lay still. I think you might have a concussion," the same male voice I had heard earlier informed me. "Who are you?" "I'm Frank Harvey," I managed to croak out. Who are you?" "My name is Dennis Wainwright. It looks like we're in the same boat, kidnapped and held against our will." "Well, praise God you're still alive. I've been trying to find you for a week now. Are you all right?" "Well, if you consider having a golf ball-sized lump on my head and being chained in a cell to be all right, then I guess the answer's yes." "Where are we?" I asked. "I don't have the foggiest idea. The last thing I remember is someone calling my name from the front of the church. I went to see who it was, and when I stepped out of my office, someone hit me over the head. Then I woke up here. I honestly don't know where here is." "Well, I can enlighten you a little. We are somewhere on a goat farm owned by Debbie Derringer. Other than that, I haven't a clue." I knew Debbie was involved in feeding me and checking on me, but I wasn't sure if she was involved in my actual kidnapping or not. For the life of me, I honestly can't think why she would do this. Why she kidnapped you, I don't know either, but I'm here because I made the mistake of coming out here looking for you, or at least hoping to find a clue as to where you might be. That was clever of you to say you were in Bodie, California. Your mom made the link to your dog Bodie, and the fact he came from this farm. The good news is that your mother and my assistant Abby know I'm here, and if they don't hear from me by 3, they'll call the sheriff's department. What time is it, do you know?" "Frank, I don't even know what day it is, let alone the time." I was finally able to sit up and look around. My vision had cleared, and the ache in my head had subsided to a steady throb. We seemed to be in a storm cellar or fallout shelter. It was like a compact apartment. There were bunk beds along one wall, a small kitchenette with a table and chairs, and a doorway leading to a small bathroom. Pastor Dennis had shackles fastened around his legs with a length of chain which fastened them to an eye bolt embedded in the wall. The chain appeared to be just long enough to let him move from the beds to the bathroom. I looked down at my own ankle and was relieved to see I had not as yet been blessed with a chain and shackles. I stood up, holding onto the bedpost to steady myself. "We need to find a way out of here before Debbie comes back," I said. I agree wholeheartedly, replied Dennis, but I'm chained to the wall. I sat back down on the bed and asked Dennis to show me his shackles. It was a very simple but effective device. 2 heavy leather cuffs designed to be locked on with padlocks and connected by a chain of about 8 inches. This in turn was chained to the wall, as I previously mentioned. The cuffs would be easier to break than the padlocks, but only if I had something could find something to cut the leather with. I headed over to the kitchen area and started opening drawers. They were all empty except one, which contained Dennis's and my wallets. And there were cupboards. I thought perhaps if we were careful, we might be able to burn through the leather using the elements on the stovetop. But that idea died when I found there was no power to the stove. The breaker for the 220 must be off. I've already looked through all the cabinets. There's nothing there of any use, Dennis said with a sigh. We'll just have to pray that the sheriff will listen to your assistant and then hopefully find us. I walked over, handed him his wallet, and sat back down on the bed next to him. There has to be something here we can use, I said. I was darned if I would just give up. Then it hit me. I remembered that when I helped a friend of mine put a new stove in his house, I had cut my hand on the edge of the piece of sheet metal closing in the back of the stove. I got up and was walking towards the stove when I heard the sound of hinges squeaking. I quickly ran back to the bed and lay down. We need to pretend I haven't woken up yet, I said, and closed my eyes. How is he? I heard Debbie ask a few seconds later. Not good, Pastor Dennis responded. I think you may have hit him too hard. He'll survive, she stated flatly. Here, put these shackles on his ankles and give me the end of the chain. Don't try anything like you did last time or you'll get another taste of the stun gun. I felt Dennis fasten the cuffs around my legs and heard the click of the padlocks closing as he fastened them. Then I heard the chain rattle across the floor and some clinking as Debbie locked it to the eye-bolt. I'll be back in a while with your supper, she said. I lay still until I heard the squeak of hinges on the shelter's door and Dennis nudged me. She's gone, but I don't know for how long. But now that you're shackled, what difference does it make? Dennis asked rhetorically. It's all right. I think we have a way to cut these leather cuffs, I said as I headed for the stove again. I pulled the stove out from the wall and looked at the back. Sure enough, it had a galvanized piece of sheet metal screwed to the back. Now the problem was how to get it off so I could use it to cut the leather. I tried turning the screws with my fingers, but only one by the lower corner was loose enough to turn and remove. I was quickly getting frustrated. If I could just bend the corner out enough, then maybe I could rub the cuff over it until it cut through. I pulled the stove out a bit further to see if I could use the tip of the screw to pry the corner of the metal sheet. And there, by the grace of God, lying on the floor under the stove, was a dinner fork. I grabbed the fork and used it to pry the corner of the sheet metal. Then I sat down on the floor, feeling a bit like a contortionist, and managed to line the side of the cup up with the edge of the sheet metal. It seemed to take forever, but finally, after what seemed like an eternity of chafing the cuff against the metal, it parted and fell to the floor. 1 cuff down, 3 to go. But first I had to stop and rest for a few minutes because my leg was aching. Finally, the second cuff gave and I was free of the shackles. I motioned Pastor Dennis over, and with me supporting his legs, we managed to get his shackles off in half the time. Now we needed to get out of here before Debbie came back with our supper. We headed down the short hall to the door and found that it dead-ended at a ladder. Looking up, I saw a round hatch with a wheel in the center. I climbed the ladder and tried turning the wheel. It wouldn't budge. I tried again, really putting my all into it. Still no movement. Now what? I snapped, feeling frustrated and angry. Try turning the wheel counterclockwise, Dennis suggested. What the heck? At this point there was nothing to lose. I grabbed the wheel and pushed it counterclockwise. Sure enough, it turned a half a turn and stopped. Panicked, I tried to turn it more, then realized that the hatch was moving, slightly upward with each effort. I stopped trying to turn the wheel and pushed the hatch upward. The hatch moved without resistance, and I slowly lifted it and eased it over to the side. As it had with Debbie, it squeaked, and I was sure the sound would bring her running. I stopped and listened, but heard no sound of running footsteps or yelling. I climbed out of the shelter and reached back to help Dennis, but he was already stepping over the lip of the hatch. "Now what do we do?" he asked. "Now we try to sneak off the farm and go for help," I stated with much more confidence than I felt. I eased the hatch cover closed and turned the wheel. I figured it would buy us a bit more time should Debbie happen to check. I looked around and found we were in a barn behind some hay bales. I told Dennis to wait there while I checked to see what our options were for getting out of the barn. I quickly moved around the pile of hay bales and moved to the front of the barn. The door was open, and I could see Debbie over in a field next to the house, working her dog with a small herd of goats. What I didn't see was my car, and I wondered what had happened to it. There was no time to worry about that now. Dennis and I needed to get out of the barn, and the front way wasn't an option. Debbie would see us as soon as we stepped out of the barn. I hurried back to where I'd left Dennis and found he had used the time to pry open a window in the back wall and get out. He motioned me to follow him. So I climbed out of the window, then closed it behind me. "Where to now?" he asked me. "I think the best thing to do is try and stay low and move straight out away from the barn. We can use the barn to shield us from view long enough until we can cut over to the road and head for town," I replied. So that is exactly what we did. Running in a crouch isn't easy, but it is amazing what you can do when you feel you're in danger. We were about half a mile away from the barn when we dropped into a small creek bed. The water looked refreshing, and I stooped down to take a drink. "I wouldn't drink that if I were you," Pastor Dennis said. "You aren't a country boy, are you?" "Well, no, I grew up in the city," I answered him. "You see, that water may look all right, but it's likely full of runoff, which could contain pesticides and fertilizers from the surrounding fields. So like I say, I wouldn't drink that if I were you." I looked at the water I had scooped into my hands and dumped it on the ground. Sadly, it just made me feel that much thirstier. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "I guess we better get a move on before Debbie finds we've escaped and comes looking for us." We followed the creek bed to the road and then sat in the shade of the culvert to plan our next move. Our biggest problem now is that if we follow the road to town, there's no cover if Debbie comes along. I stated the obvious. "You're right. Plus, by the time we hear her car, she would have spotted us. But what other options do we have?" "Do you know where this creek goes?" I queried. "No, I grew up in Gurneyville, but I really don't know the surrounding area very well." "Shh," I cautioned. "Do you hear that?" "Sounds like a car, but I think it's coming from the direction of town." "I'm going to sneak a peek." And he slipped out of the culvert. I sat there holding my breath and praying he wouldn't be seen. Then I heard the car slide to a stop and voices that sounded excited. I eased myself to the edge of the culvert and was trying to think of how to see what was happening when I heard Abby call. "It's all right, Frank, you can come out. I'm with the sheriff." I crawled out of the culvert, and sure enough, there sat the county sheriff's car. The sheriff was standing by the front fender with Pastor Dennis, listening and taking notes. Abby was standing at the top of the embankment, looking down at me with a big smile on her face. "You did it. You found Pastor Wainwright." "It's more like I stumbled into where he was being held," I said as I climbed up the embankment to the road. I had barely gotten my feet on the gravel roadway when Abby threw her arms around me and hugged me. "I was so worried something had happened to you. It seemed to take forever to convince the sheriff to come look for you, but here we are," she said, looking into my eyes. "Why, Abigail Barstow, I didn't know you cared." "Of course I care, you big oaf. If I lose you, where else am I going to get a job in Ryeville?" Then she kissed me and let me go. I was too stunned for words. That kiss was far more than an "I need you around for the job" kiss. I felt it to my toes. I was still standing there in a daze when the sheriff and Dennis came over, and Dennis introduced me. "Frank, I'd like you to meet an old high school friend of mine, John Barrett. John is now the county sheriff." I held up my hand. "It's nice to meet you, Sheriff. I just wish the circumstances were different." "It's nice to meet you too, Mr. Harvey. I'm going to need a statement from you, but I think it would be best if we went back to the office. You both look like you could use some water and a chair. We rode back into town in comfortable silence. Dennis rode up front with the sheriff, and Abby rode in back with me and held my hand the whole way. And that's the end of chapter 9. So, Groaner time. So you ready for this week's Groaner? I know you're already ready for chapter 10 of Frank and Abby mystery. Seems like the mystery's being solved, but there might be more to come. All right. The Groaner of the Week. Well, this is a political joke, and you can change it to fit whatever country you live in and whatever politician you don't particularly care for. But we're going to say this happened in the country of Smooleyville, the country of Smooly. There we go. And there'd recently been an election. It was maybe a year past the election for the new president of Smooly. And the fellow who got elected was first very popular, but within months of coming into office, his true colors started to show, and people didn't like him at all. Well, as was his wont, the president of Smooly enjoyed jogging and running, but he was finding it a bit cumbersome going for his morning jog with all these security people around him and security detail, and he didn't like that. He always enjoyed his morning jog by himself because that was a time to sort of think about life and other things that he needed to get clear in his head. So this one morning he managed to get up early and elude all his security people and staff, sneak out of the president's residence, and go for a jog. Well, being he hadn't been in that area for long because he was the new president, he saw a path leading into the woods and thought, well, that'd be a good jogging path and no one's going to see me in the woods. So off he went down the path in the woods. And pretty soon the path made a sharp turn and ran along the edge of a cliff. Well, unfortunately, as this president started to run around the curve in the cliff, his feet slipped out from under him and over the cliff he went. Well, if you've ever watched cartoons, as wont may be, about halfway down the face of this 200-foot drop was a tree growing out of the side of the cliff. And this fellow managed to grab hold of this tree as he went by and hung on, and luckily the tree held. And so there he is, hanging by his hands halfway down this cliff and wondering, what am I going to do? Well, he's hanging there trying to think of some way he might get out of this predicament, but he just can't think of anything. There's no footholds or handholds on this cliff to try and climb up or climb down. And pretty soon he hears voices. And he starts yelling, hello, hello, I need help. Well, a few minutes later, these three little faces peer over the cliff. Three young boys are peering down at him. And he says, can you boys help me? Yeah, hang on, mister. We're going to go get some rope and we'll help you. So it seemed like forever went by. But pretty soon a snope. No, it wasn't a snope. It was a rope. And a rope came snaking down the front of the cliff and was just long enough to reach where the president was hanging from this proverbial tree. And the little faces peer over the cliff again and say, we tied the rope to a big tree up here so you can climb up. Well, the president risks letting go with one hand and grabbing the rope. And then he grabs it there and he slowly manages to climb up this rope and over the edge of the cliff and lays there panting for a few minutes. And these three, they probably look like they're 7 or 8-year-old boys, are standing there looking at him, just gaping, right? And finally, he stands up and he looks at these three boys and he says, do you boys know who I am? And one of the boys goes, yes, sir, you're the president. That's right, son, I'm the president of Smalley. And you just saved my life. You've done your country a fantastic and great service. And the little boy says, well, yes, sir. He says, well, you three boys deserve a reward. Well, for that they all perk up. And they're thinking like money or new bicycles or, something great. And he turns to the first boy and he says, son, I want to give you, you're probably thinking about a toy or something like that. I don't want to give you that for a reward. I want to give you something that'll change your life. So when you grow up, what would you like to be? Well, sir, my daddy's an Air Force pilot in the Smalley Air Force, and I want to be an Air Force pilot too. Well, son, I can't make you an Air Force pilot. That's something you have to do for yourself, but you do well in school and keep your grades up, and when you get towards the end of high school, he says, you apply for the Air Force Academy, and I've got some people who owe me big time, and I'll pull strings for you and make sure you get into the Air Force Academy. But learning how to fly and all that, that's up to you. But I'll do everything I can to help you. So you just keep your grades up in school and work hard. And he turns to the second boy and says, son, what do you want? Sir, I'd like to be a commissioned officer in the Smalley Navy. Well, son, same thing as I just told your friend here. You keep your grades up in school and work hard, and when you graduate from high school, I'll pull all the strings I can and get you into the Naval Academy. And the rest is up to you as far as becoming a commissioned officer. But I'll do everything I can in my power to help you. And he turns to the third little boy and he says, so son, what would you like? And the little boy says, well, Mr. President, I'd like white roses for my funeral. The president says, pardon? Sir, I'd like white roses for my funeral. Well, son, what do you mean white roses for your funeral? You're only what, 8, 7? How old are you? I'm 8, sir. Well, why are you worried about your funeral? Why on earth do you want white roses for your funeral, for a reward? Well, sir, when my daddy finds out that I saved your life, he's going to kill me. There's your groaner. Alrighty. Hope you've enjoyed today's groaner and shoutouts and the chapter 9 of Frank and Abby mystery. And until Tuesday when we do our baking and other things. And I just hope you enjoy your weekend. And check out Browan's video that he did. Well, tongue-in-cheek, right? And see if you pick up on the pun. I mean, the whole video was a pun, but it seems like a few people were more interested in the contents of my cupboards than they were in the pun. But see if you can pick up on the pun. Anyway, that's a couple of videos back, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. Until Tuesday, take care, stay safe, and God bless.